Yep, that's right. I do the Day 9 daily. Whoops, I dropped my pen. And the pen is used for an essential purpose. Twiddling. Welcome to Day 9 Daily number 500 and, wow, 18, part 2, where we learn to be a better gamer. In part number 1, we introduced this interesting game from White-Ra against an opponent named Green Machine, and this is a really interesting moment in all Protoss vs. Zerg matchups. This is the moment where Zerg begins to go, oh my god, is there an attack coming? That's when we see Zergs begin scouting around the extremities of their base, looking for pylons around here, or for pylons in this area. It's a little bit easier with these two watchtowers to deal with early 4 to 6 gate pressure that happens at the 8-minute mark, but from the Zerg perspective, this is when Zerg wants to begin ramping up, when his lair begins kicking into gear, when he begins adding on more Vespene gas geysers and all that good stuff. So the question is, how is Protoss going to mess with Fangs? We see generally quick expands around the 7 to 10-minute mark, or we see attacks from the 7 to 10-minute mark. And White-Ra's going Oracle nuts. Literally, all White-Ra has is probes and oracles. And my god, White-Ra has been really on point about chrono boosting. He's building another one of these hilariously expendable mothership cores, perhaps to do something, perhaps not. Per usual, recall that energy does recharge at a rate of 1 every 2 seconds. So for the extra 25 energy, you just need another minute for when the oracle's done. Ah, yes. But then we have this interesting oracle ability of the Mineral Shield. Now, the Mineral Shield lasts, right now, Entomb lasts for 60 seconds, and it's 75 energy, which means it's available every 2.5 minutes. So every 2.5 minutes, you can shut down their mining for about 1 minute. More like 30 seconds to 1 minute. Because then all the nibbling begins. All the workers begin working it down. But this does tend to have a pretty reasonable impact on the mining, because for about 30 seconds, we have all these probes that are not, all these drones that aren't mining. And I will note that this many drones not mining for 30 seconds, you can actually do the math. It's 20 minerals every 30 seconds. 20 minerals every 30 seconds for what? How many is this? 16, 19. Let's round up to 20. That's 400 minerals lost. I like these noises. They're fun. And White-Ra is still building more frickin' oracles. That's so kick-ass. Now, while these oracles are going down, I'm unsure as to what the best option is. There's a number of different situations that you'll be in. White-Ra has managed to kind of see the Roach Warren, kind of at least surmise the Roach Warren isn't there by, for instance, seeing that there's still no gas in the main base. So I'm not that sold on this transition that White-Ra is going to do, which is just straight into Blink and Dark Templar. I think maybe a Sentry Stalker expand with Blink might be a little bit better, but either way, transitioning to Blink Stalkers makes a ton of sense no matter what you're doing. It is the most versatile mixture in the entire game. It can deal with basically anything. But I don't necessarily think he's behind, and yet still, Dark Shrine. We have the Mothership Core. This actually is one of the biggest benefits to the Mothership Core, keeping Zerg locked out of watchtowers. Now, what I will note is that White-Ra actually has, count it, 1, 2, 3, and then here's a 4th Oracle coming up. Boink. Continuing to entomb frickin' everything. I think this is awesome. The good old happy time Dark Templar doesn't really do anything, which is why I'm not that sold on it. Oh, this one does. This actually is an interesting concept in action, but still I'm not totally sold. The Dark Templar harasses one location, while the Oracles keep the Zerg player preoccupied with all these mineral shields, like focusing around on this. But I will dare say, I'm going to come back to this moment in time to the 8-minute mark, and I'm going to come look at Green Machine. This is... What I'm about to do is what I think the only way to demonstrate that this is good. Entomb costs 75 minerals. It's quite cheap. Or excuse me, 75 energy. It's quite cheap. I'm going to open up this Units tab, and I want to note that Green Machine is staying as low on money as he can with these larvae up. This is one of the only times it really gets high, but he spends the larva quite quickly. And very immediately gets up to around that money 65 or so drones. Begins making himself some roaches. In other words, not terrible macro, by any means. Even has this macro hatch up. With 4 hatches and 9 larvae, that's not that surprising. And then the DT comes in and very annoyingly kills off frickin' all the drones. You see them just falling one at a time. This is around the time when Stefano was getting maxed before. Right? 11 to 12 minutes is the infamous, I think the official mark is Stefano maxing at 11:11. Freaked people out and that sort of thing. In other words, the Entomb is actually doing considerable delay and damage to everything that's going on here, especially with these 4 oracles and especially with this giant amount of space that is prevalent in StarCraft 2 around the edges of maps. So yeah, actually is doing quite considerable damage, which I think is pretty cool, right? It's this harassment that keeps the Zerg wanting to stay back. This is the period of time when Zerg players generally want to be getting aggressive like this. And White Rod just continues to respond with this sort of thing. Isn't that nifty? Isn't that nifty? We cannot hold. I am here. And this is always... This attack right here is always a big risk when there are harassment opportunities and DTs in particular. So this is all just a stay back, stay back, stay back sort of play. And I feel like this moment in time is one of these, like, yeah, I'm not so sure I have, like, the most refined build order. Things seem like they should be pretty strong. Like, we probably should have had a good defense considering that we have about the same, or about the right amount of supply for it.
We meet our fate.
I mean, I don't know if the correct answer is actually to go for Stargate and then Robo Twilight, which is what many players do end up doing, but still, White Ra holds strong and continues to do this annoying-ass Entomb stuff. This one, 27 energy. This one, 77, so it can do another one. This one, 164, can actually do 2 Entombs. This one on the side, more Entombs. Green Machine does get another expansion now, but it ain't necessarily going great for him. He has 58 workers, and 58 should be able to support a Ling Roach army as long as there's not too many on gas. Generally need around like 65-ish, but 58 should be kind of close. This is kind of... I would almost phrase it as Entomb forces your opponent to struggle with transitioning. And what are transitions? Transitions are always the weak points. Or, transitions is obviously when you're going from one thing to another thing, but in terms of what can I do knowing he's transitioning, that's the time when you kill people off. Like attacking at the 16.5-minute mark, that's when all Protosses are winning lately because that's right before he gets Broodlords. That's that transition period. All of that thing. So this is really screwing up the Zerg's transition. And of course, aggression is only going to hurt that. Mothership Core showing up to try to prove her worth as a creature. Awesome, awesome, awesome. This Zerg player is actually not mining. And if you think about it, with the Mothership Core, plays like this, very easy to retreat with a recall, and attacks like this, very easy to be made very strong with this Entomb in the back. Dumb, dumb stalkers. I have no explanation for you. I actually find this freaking hilarious. it's around now that I will just briefly stop and note that our Zerg player hasn't been playing terribly. He's been doing his best to get up additional bases. He's lost 16 workers. This was all in a single DT spring. Alright, nothing is really messed with him other than the entombs, and yet in this unit tab he just has 19 roaches and 7 infestors. White Raw has done insane damage on just 2 bases, which totally tickles my fancy. And this is where, you know, we can do the super duper mega commentary about what the best options are and all that, but I think I want to speed through this a little bit more so we can get to another game. Yeah. Where White Rod just continues to entomb like crazy. And what we're seeing is an extreme slow in the teching of Green Machine. Almost always we have a hive done by now. There are 14 infestors. These 7 infestors I think are just a touch overkill, but why make these? Well, because we are so low on minerals from getting entombed all the time, and we are so high on gas from getting... the fact that you can't entomb. There's another mothership core that just dies. You can't entomb extractors. I'm gonna speed it up. White Rod just rounds out his composition. Continues to add on more stalkers. I think the one thing that was missing from this was an earlier robotics facility. I probably wouldn't really go for the for too many Colossus. I would just push straight with 3 and make sure I have enough Blink Stalkers as my core mix. This is very much so the way MC plays. It's not as emphasizing of the Colossus, but more emphasizing of the Stalker. And then with just simple Blink Stalker plus Entomb, White Raw's got himself way the hell ahead, which thrills and excites me because this is, yet again, one of these cool examples of totally new crap happening in that heart of the swarm. Yes. White Rod doing the ever-infamous 1 square off Nexus. More entombs. I wish there was like a minerals lost from entomb tab. So that way you can just total it up, but I mean, I don't really need to emphasize how incredibly painful and excruciating it's been to not have money. I mean, how often does a units lost tab look like this? White Ra has lost way more than Zerg, and is way ahead of Zerg. That just doesn't happen. Well, not until Hive Tech. Generally, when you do have Hive Tech, and it's the Broodlord Infestor army being the most mega efficient army of all time. And White Rock cleans it on up. I just thought this was cool. This was just like one of these like Entomb Lulz games where you're like, oh my god, wow, if you do get those 4 oracles up, you can literally entomb his whole freaking base and own his whole freaking face. And also, this had a different flavor than, you know, what we're used to in the usual PvZs. It's not Protoss, sit, attack right at the 16-minute mark. Oh, you lost. Blah, puke in the Zerg's face, make him feel bad, yeah. It's not that. It's not this passive game. It's very active. Blink Stalkers moving around, trying to set the entombs up to maximize the potential of the entombs. The mothership core could have been used for recall. Died a lot. Died so much. Died often. But if it had stayed alive, could be used for recall, to be able to send Blink Stalkers in, recall back home, continue to entomb for max effectiveness. Pew! I think the biggest question is, how does this sort of build order deal with this big vulnerability that's popping up at this 8-minute mark? Probably skipping out on this +1 weapon for a sentry first. Probably leaving the mothership core back for defense because all she's really going to do is frickin' die. this is just a little bit on the light side of defense. Probably Stargate, Gate, Twilight, N+1. Something like that feels just a smidge safer to me. Plus, I don't really see what the big benefit of getting Blink and the Dark Templar as fast as we did was. I think if we actually just got more gateways, warped in more stalkers, and went for Blink, Blink would be a little bit later. DTs would not ever happen, but we'd have more stalkers. So we can do things like attack with Blink stalkers from this angle, ready to recall, while entombing the whole time. I think that would be super cool. So that strategy I liked. I actually watched it live on White Raw's ladder, or White Raw's stream, and then we got to do it again here. I'm gonna go ahead and watch a PvT game between White Raw and Morrow. Morrow has been doing a lot of meching lately and is currently in the midst of a 100-hour streamathon. I hope he doesn't die. If he died, that would be an example of dedication. I think he'll live. I'm pretty sure he'll either live or fall asleep, one of those two. But he's doing 100-hour streamathon. If you go to teamliquid.net and look in the top right corner of the streams, you'll see it there. If you're watching this daily in the archives, he's probably still streaming. For any of you who don't know, Morrow is someone I call the Infested Terran because he played Terran and then switched over to Zerg. A lot of people were saying that Zerg was the weakest race at the start of StarCraft 2, so he switched over, and there are even like funny screenshots of him having like 40 losses in a row, but he battled right through there and became one of the better Zergs. So what Morrow's been doing, he's been playing a lot of Heart of the Swarm. He's meching right now on his ladder. Excuse me, meching right now on his ladder stream. So you can see the sort of things that he's been playing around with. The big things that Protosses have felt, and that certainly Terrans have been abusing, is the fact that there's really not that much that Protoss can do about Widow Mines early. We'll actually see it at the start of the game, and considering we're pretty far into things, we may as well just speed it up. How do you deal with fast Widow Mines? The problem with the Widow Mine for the Protoss player is that it can actually shoot down observers. So the one thing that will really deal with the Widow Mines directly is killed by it. So it's very easy to just float the observers straight into the minefields. So Morrow, you'll note, is actually going for gas, then barracks, then orbital command factory at the same time. Is my sound on? It sounds so quiet. Wow. It is on. Okay, we're good. So there are currently no Marines here, just straight into the reactor factory build. Not really a huge reason to make Marines ultra early, with the exception of this bunker. Morrow will be salvaging this, no doubt, soon, but you'll note that when's the earliest time that players are building a robo facility? Well, generally after this second stalker, sometimes after the first stalker, but even then, the earliest you could get it is right about now, and we're getting Widow Mines before then. However, White Rod, like a total badass boss, is going for Stargate. Oh, yeah. And mines coming out 2 at a time. So, I do feel like most people have been saying, especially in the pro forum for Heart of the Swarm, that the Widow Mine is really difficult to deal with as Protoss because do note that 160 damage is a Stalker's life total. Oh! Oh, no. That's so terrifying. So how do we deal with it? White Rod just doing some really nice control, just sort of zoning out the Widow Mines as best he can, and going for the double gateway. Still absolutely no frickin' defense in sight from the observer standpoint, but he's going for this cool Stargate. So yet again, we're going to be stepping away to a break. When we come back, we're going to see how White Ra stabilizes against these Widow Mines, makes them look not nearly as good as everyone's saying, and then goes up against one of the most terrifying meching players of all time, Morrow, who has literally only been meching since beta has been released. He is, in my eyes, the most experienced mecher around. We're going to see White Ra do the hurting on him. Woo! See you in part 3 in a sec.